But what I'd like to do is take the next 45 minutes or so and talk about what I think is the most fundamental equation in computer science and, frankly, in app development and app design nowadays, right? You know, what's your favorite math equation? Fundamental theorem of calculus, Newton's law of gravity, what? Everybody's got favorites, right? I think the one that I think hopefully when you walk away from this presentation will start to appreciate and think about is that if you take open by design, and I will define what I mean, and it's not going to be as obvious as you think it is because we're in an all things open conference, right? Okay? And you add this notion of the double rainbow unicorn, like, what? What? Right? You will all, as developers, will be able to rule the world, or perhaps even improve the world a bit, okay? That's the equation that we're going to get into. And this whole presentation is hopefully going to make the argument and maybe give a little bit of advice for someone who's been in the business of programming and computer science for many years. Give a little bit of advice of kind of things we need to think about as we all seek the unicorn, right? And this notion of double rainbow unicorn is actually not mine. It comes from Jonathan, who's the executive director of OpenStack. We all know what unicorns are, right? You know, as developers, we want to build that killer app, right? And it's mythical, right? We don't know what it is. You kind of know when you see it, right? But you can't find it. Well, you know, Jonathan, during a presentation we gave together, just doubled down on that concept, and he added 2 rainbows to the unicorn. I thought that was genius, you know? So 2 additional things that will never happen. But you can improve your chances of finding the unicorn. So that's what we're going to get into. So let me set a little bit of context. First of all, you know, when I talk to developers, when I talk to our clients who have developers, business folks who care about developers, they're all very excited because they start seeing all of these statistics. They look around and they understand that, you know, 90% of us have our phones at arm's reach, you know, all of the time. And I like to know who that other 10% is, right? I practically sleep with my phone. I've got multiple devices. I have the new iPad waiting for me at home, right? As soon as I get back, I'll get that thing going, right? It is unbelievable how connected we are. When you look at the fact that all the data that's being produced, and those of us who do mobile app development know this for sure, is unstructured in nature, right? What does that mean, right? Well, you have to make sense of the data. How do you make sense of that data? That's algorithms, right? That's compute power. This is very, very important. None of this is magic. Like, physics hasn't changed, right? Just because you have more data. You have to deal with the physics. And then, of course, the advent of all of the connectivity that's occurring around us, right? What people call Internet of Things. It's going to be very interesting to see how that economy is going to change the physics of not just the apps we develop, but the platforms that we use to develop those apps and how we develop that. So all of that is very, very exciting. And then, again, those of us who are technologists feel incredibly empowered. Because if you go talk to your bosses, for those of you who work for big companies, small companies, it doesn't matter, right? You ask them, what is the most important thing for you to succeed in your business? For you to find that unicorn, right, and make all that money or help the world or whatever it is that motivates you, right? It's technology, right? And us here are at the center of technology, right? You all of us who are living in these open communities, all of us who are contributing, all of us who are good open source citizens, and I'll get into that, all of us who try to push the envelope, all of us who are promoting our particular open source project, right, is driving the technology that will do that. But at the same time, you know, with this great power comes what? Thank you. Am I like the only nerd here? Actually, I would consider myself a geek. I saw someone with a nerd shirt, right? I'm a geek. There's a difference between a geek and a nerd. YouTube it. You'll see the difference. Bless you. But you know, when you think about this, though, it's also upon us to change a little bit about how we think, okay? Code is great, but code without context is often orphaned, right? You need to start to understand the context that you live in. that has implications about how you program, understand the modules you live in and what your folks in the left and right are doing. Yeah, okay. There's techniques for dealing with that. There's pair programming, all kinds of interesting things you can do. But there's also the context of the business you're in, right? It's not just understanding the technology, but it's actually having the dialogues with your clients, with your users, with your business leaders, right? Actually understanding, what profit and loss means, right? Those types of things. And I think that the developers that are most marketable, the ones that are most valuable, the ones that people want to hire the most, are those that can transcend that. They have what I call kind of T-shaped skills. You're an expert, Node, Mongo, NoSQL, whatever, developer, but at the same time, you understand the context of whatever it is you're in. Those are the folks who actually, I think, are the most valuable and also have the potential for doing the most good. Now, we've been on this journey of open technologies fueling an IT renaissance. I mean, we're all kind of walking around with swag right now for quite some time. I joined IBM in the early 90s. I got my PhD in computer science from a university called RPI in upstate New York, so I went to IBM Research. It's a pretty natural thing to do if you're in New York. And I started a lot of my original work working with Tim Berners-Lee on a lot of the original standards, on HTML, on CSS, on SGML before that, right? Does anyone know why HTML was created? Was it for doing spinning logos or for Sports Center? Or, no? It was to disseminate physics information. What was the first DTD, because this was pre-schema, for XML? What was the use case for the extensible markup language when we created it? It was the mathematical markup language to disseminate and compute with math, right? It's very interesting how we've transitioned from that notion of open collaboration, open source that supported these markups, right, to where we are now, right? While we have been on this journey of leveraging open technology, trying to come up with good ways of using it, creating markets, helping people do more, things have also changed. And I think one of the biggest differences, probably the most important difference between back then and now, is the involvement of the end users in this, right? It's not just a bunch of academics thinking about interesting technology, putting out an XML parser in Apache, good stuff, right? But perhaps thinking more largely, right? When you walk into any open source community and you look at how vibrant it is, the most vibrant communities are the ones where the individual contributor or the end user are potentially the most powerful, right? Does anyone know who the #1 contributor of code is to OpenStack? I'm just assuming you know what OpenStack is. We'll get into that. It's not IBM, although we're in the top 4 always. It's the individual contributor, right? Healthy ecosystem, right? Over 20,000 participants in that ecosystem. So that's how things have changed. The involvement and the importance of this and the recognition of collaborating in the open and trying to accelerate the art of the possible is what has changed. And that's what's driven this kind of new renaissance that we're in now, okay? So let's start with the equation. Open by design. Remember, open by design plus the double rainbow unicorn equals developers rule the world. Open by design. Now, there's 2 dimensions to how I think we need to start thinking about as a community of open source developers, as innovators in the open. And one is, let's define what we mean by open technology. Because it's really important when you use open technology, when you contribute open technology, that you understand a couple of things. Licenses are very important. Apache license is great. Right? You want a license where what you're working in protects your intellectual property. You want a license so that what you're doing can actually be shipped in a product. You want a license in such that if a vendor who happens to, say, control all the committers, right, in a project decides to switch licenses, you're not holding a weird bag. You've built a business on a tower of things that can go away on you. Because oftentimes what you find is that folks are trying to jump on this open source bandwagon and use it almost as a marketing tool, right? Which is somewhat disappointing, right? Oh, my product is open source. That's great, right? But tell me about the community. Tell me about the license. Tell me about the diversity of the ecosystem of participants. And when I mean diversity, I mean the number of different folks who contribute to your code outside of your company. Right? That's a very important thing to think about. Also, the committing process, right? You know, having a badge, you know, I'm a Apache Cordova. Carlos Santana was here talking about, you know, that badge is very marketable, right? You know, employers want committers, right? Because you have a lot of power. It means you know what's going on. What is the process for earning your stripes? When IBM joined and helped create OpenStack with Rackspace, you know how many committers we got? 0. We had to go through the process. Right? We got a couple of them here, you know, and we have over 400 developers now working on OpenStack. Right? Over time, what is the process where anybody, whether you're large or small, can contribute? And what's the governance of that? Those are things that, as you think about putting your code in open source, as you think about leveraging open technology by design, that you need to start understanding and articulating. Because, you know, the clients that we serve aren't dumb. They know, right? They know that, you know, they will not use a technology that is pseudo-open, okay? So now, let's talk about open by design, but from a different perspective, from a computer science perspective, right? So, you know, I often think of you know, I find my center in my my ability to relax, let's say, in 3 activities. Video gaming, which I do way too much of, right? Yoga, which I'm trying to do. And most importantly, coding, right? It's an art form, right? And it's something that is very, very thoughtful. And when you think about open by design, oftentimes, especially if you just kind of go through Git and look at all the libraries and start trolling for code that you might want to use, right? You find code that perhaps isn't really well thought out. You find code that maybe wasn't designed for reuse. I don't know why I'm looking at you, sir. You write great code, I'm sure. I'm looking at him because he's looking back at me, which is great. Thank you. So it's important that you understand, as you write modules, in any language, classes, whatever, that they're well-formed. And what does that mean? Your pre- and post-conditions are well understood, right? Just take Knuth volumes 1, 2, and 3 and read them again, right? That's really important because, you know, nothing will slow down the movement that we're living in, the open source movement, than, you know, having a plethora of unusable components or libraries and things, right? That's hashtag no es bueno, right? I said hashtag, not pound, right? I say pound instead of hashtag. You also need to think about the extensibility of what you're building, right? Documentation first. Remember the old literal programming days? There's a renaissance in that, right? The whole idea of describing your use cases within the code you write them, with the acknowledgement that others will use that, right? Because although we all are artists, I would argue that none of us start with an empty canvas. If you do, you're probably foolish. I don't. Right? I look for SDKs, I look for code, I look for samples, and I refine from there. So those are the 2 dimensions of open. Now let's talk a little bit about this double rainbow unicorn. You know, not all unicorns are created equal. Oftentimes you find people, companies, you know, small and large, forcing the unicorn on you, like this picture on the left, right? They got a guy on a horse and they put a cone in it. This is a really important app. You must have it. This is like and they just market the hell out of it. For those of you who play video games, does anybody play video games here? Yeah. All right. So if you're playing, you know, I don't want to pick on any vendor. I got to be real careful here. But if you're playing, you know, take your PS4, Xbox, whatever game, right? And, you know, they often have companion apps for those games, right, where you can do interesting things while you're not in the game, okay? Across the board, they're terrible. They're just horrendous because they're trying to create community, you know, fake community that is just, you know, why would I leave my existing community circle to create some other weird community to interact, right? but yet they market those apps as if they are the end-all and be-all. And the reason is because, by the way, if you're in the video game business, you make most of your money on downloadable content, right? So they're trying to get you hooked to then start buying stats or whatever it is you want to buy, right? That's an example of a unicorn that's trying to be forced on you, right? Oftentimes we have good intentions. We think we know what we want to do, but at the end of the day, what we really want is the double rainbow unicorn, right? The thing that really does add value. So how do you start to improve your chances of finding that unicorn? Well, I'm going to talk a little bit about open platforms. I'm going to talk a little bit about failing fast, tool sets, and then probably the most important aspect of all of this, and that's design thinking. Okay? So far, so good? We're in the second part of the equation. It's not that hard. Okay. First one. There's lots of open technology that we at IBM are involved in. There's just so much that we do. We have thousands of developers, literally thousands of developers that participate in open source communities, committers, communities that we're trying to start, and ecosystems we're trying to help. The palette of things for me to talk about is quite large. But I wanted to focus on two areas, cloud and mobile, and just focus on a couple of open technologies within those, because they are very important for that first chart I had, all that workload, all that algorithm. You need a flexible infrastructure. You need to be able to develop fast. So I think that if you don't have that, it's going to kind of slow down everything, right? So the first one I want to talk about is OpenStack. And does everybody know what OpenStack was? There was an OpenStack session here. Does everybody know what it is? Yes? No? Who doesn't know? No one's going to say no. You don't know? Oh, very good. Thank you. I will talk to these people so you guys can go to sleep. No. OpenStack has become a ubiquitous infrastructure as a service platform. That's open source platform. Provisioning, compute, storage, and network. Okay? That's what it has become. Private clouds, public clouds, hybrid clouds. That's what it is. And if you look way back when this whole when people are trying to understand what cloud is, what infrastructure as a service is, what is platform as a service, it wasn't clear what was going to happen. Okay? In fact, there were many different open source projects going on. Okay? But one particular project really stood out, and that's OpenStack. Not because it was the best code, it had the best community, the best ecosystem, very vibrant, right? A set of folks, especially end users. So a small group of us at IBM thought that, do we want to push some proprietary cloud technology, or do we want to maybe join up with the community, work on a project, and try to accelerate the adoption of cloud? Right? The cloud market is still growing, okay? And all of these types of initiatives have that market expanding effect. So we walked in to Rackspace, had a discussion with their CEO and Jonathan, who was at the time at Rackspace, said, hey, look, maybe we can create something special. Let's get some of our partner friends and see if we can maybe accelerate the adoption of OpenStack. And I got to tell you, when we announced that we were doing kind of a foundation and opening up the governance, because by the way, all the project leads were Rackers, right, Rackspace people. No one really cared, right? Our first conference had, I don't know, 200 people maybe. There was more people here than at the OpenStack conference. There was, someone brought their dog. That was pretty much the extent of it. We have a conference next week, in a couple of weeks in Paris, and Jonathan tells me there's close to 5,000 to 6,000 people signed up for it. This is an open source project on one technology. And by the way, the community of OpenStack has grown over a 2 to 3 year period to be larger than Linux. This is amazing, right? And what really fueled this was the OpenStack way, was those imperatives that I said in the beginning, right? The transparency of governance, the clarity around how folks can be committing. And of course, it was a unicorn. We didn't know it at the time, right? But it turned out to because there was a thirst for interoperability there, right? To get freedom of choice on hypervisor, to accelerate the deployment of your infrastructure to build your apps. But that's not good enough. Right? I would think that's good enough, right? But it's not good enough. You have to think about now the actual applications, right? OpenStack really is targeted at folks who manage infrastructure, who provide infrastructure for application developers, right? And there's other things you can provide, like object store and so forth. But what about the application developer? And you know, I've always wanted a platform for the people. And let me explain what I mean. If you look at development nowadays, we live in a world where, you know, everybody kind of hangs their hat on a set of languages, programming languages. And in fact, for very good reason. The language you use is good for the application you're trying to develop, right? You know, don't force Java on me if I'm trying to build a simple a mobile app. I'd like to use JavaScript, right? Or don't force, you know, Ruby on me if I'm trying to do something else, or whatever, right? We live in a polyglot world. So what we need is a platform that leverages something like OpenStack to manage the infrastructure and hides that, right? Accelerates development, but allows me to be who I am as a developer and get the job done. Allows me to fail fast, right? That's what we want. So there's an open source project started by the guys in Pivotal called Cloud Foundry. Everyone know about Cloud Foundry? Yes? No? Well, Cloud Foundry is a kind of a container of languages that allows you to very easily build applications, bring in different runtimes, bring in different services, manage those applications with some very simple command lines like Cloud Foundry push, you know, deploy, whatever, right? And you can very easily build your applications. The actual foundation, we're moving the code, just like we do with OpenStack, into an independent organization, will be launched in December. I think there's about 60 or so companies and literally hundreds of folks who are kind of contributing already code outside of the Pivotal team. That's a great example of a healthy ecosystem, and we're very excited about that. In fact, IBM, if you go by our, I was told to give a couple IBM plugs, so here we go. IBM plug number 1. Check, please. Yeah. Come to our booth and look at our IBM Bluemix. But actually, it's actually pretty neat, and I'll show you a little demo here in a second. It is a Cloud Foundry instance, right, running on our public cloud software, leveraging, for example, OpenStack for infrastructure and other things, that allows you to be very productive. Imagine as a developer, you don't have to worry about getting those machines provisioned to you. Or imagine if you're building an app and you need more memory, you just press a button. You don't have to go to like 10 people to get more memory, right? And, by the way, the app is robust, scalable, multi-geography, you know, all the things that you need to actually make your unicorn ready, right? That's what Bluemix is. And what I like to do is I pre-recorded a little demo here that just kind of walks you through what this is, and I'll talk to it. As a developer, you log in, and by the way, you can get an ID for free. I think it's like, 30 days you're for free, so go get your ID and start playing with it. And you instantly see a dashboard and a set of runtimes. So this allows you to be who you are. Are you a node person? These little tiles all represent different runtimes and services that you can bind to an application you want to get started building, okay? So I'm going through here and I'm going to create a Node.js application. And what I'm going to actually do is build an application that provisions Minecraft servers. I play Minecraft. I have lots of friends who play Minecraft. And for those of us who play Minecraft, we all know you need many servers. Why? Because you use mods, of course, right? And each server has to have their own sets of mods, depending whether you want to have a technology server or a Pixelmon server or whatever, right? So this is very, very important, being able to provision Minecraft servers. So we're going to build a little Node app that does that. And what I've done here is I have my code for actually managing that locally on my machine, and I'm going to push the code up to Bluemix using the cf push command. Now, why am I showing you command line? I can show you pretty tooling. At the end of the day, I use Sublime. I don't know what you guys use to develop code. But the point is that you could use whatever tools or editing environment you like, right? And when I push my code up, I actually get a link, externally addressable link of that application, which I can then go to, or my partners can go to, or my clients can go to do something. And what I've done here is I actually started up a Minecraft server on a particular link, and just to prove to you that it wasn't fake, I'm actually going to log in. Well, it's a movie, it could be fake, but I'm actually going to log in to that Minecraft server and enter the world. All right? So a node application, pretty simple, using a memcache service so I can store some log information. I pushed it off to Bluemix, I deployed it, and I'm walking around my Minecraft world. There's no mods on this particular server, so it's easy, right? So that's the kind of thing that you could start to do. Not create, say, Minecraft servers, but hopefully gives you the sense of how this allows you to be who you are. It allows you to build the applications and compose them. And by the way, right, we have our IBM WebSphere runtimes there. We have our DB2 runtimes. We have our Hadoop run. If you want to use our stuff, that's all good too. Trust me, that's more than good, right? We have our Watson services, which I'll talk about in a moment. And we've got partner services, right? You've got Square's got their APIs. You know, all kind of folks have their interfaces there to help you build applications more effectively and faster. So let me talk a little bit about open when it comes to the end user, right? Because what you really want to do, and there's been at least two, probably more. I attended 2 presentations on Cordova. Hopefully you all know what that is, right? Cross-platform mobile app development. But it's really important when you think about the power that HTML brings, right? HTML5 in particular. And the kinds of applications we build. Look, if you're going to build an Infinity Blade or something, you're not going to use HTML5. But if you're going to build an airline application, right, or something like that, yeah, HTML5 is probably a good idea, right? And so the combination of HTML5 and Apache Cordova and libraries like jQuery or Angular or anything like that, right, allows you to very quickly build those applications and also work across devices and form factors, right, which I think is really, really, really neat. Do you know who co-chairs HTML5? IBM. It's amazing, right? We're just, you know, it kind of, when I tell that to people, they're like, what? You know, you don't sell a browser, you don't sell a mobile device, why do you co-chair that? Well, guess what? We've been actually co-chairing HTML5 since the beginning because it is important to us that while we don't have a stake in the game when it comes to the end user device, we certainly want to make sure that the transaction that occurs from one system of engagement to system of record remains open. Right? And the last thing you want to do is get a proprietary hook in your HTML code that doesn't allow you to actually have freedom of choice of what you transact with in the back end. Talk about a quick way to slow down your unicorn, right? Now, back in the day, the battles were a little different, right? It was Netscape and Microsoft fighting over the blink tag. I don't know if you remember that. You remember the blink tag? Yeah, I was in those meetings. It was hilarious. It was mind-blowing. Like, wow, that blink tag is really important, you know? Times change. So, you know, this equation is not commutative, okay? So I have open by design, right? I have the unicorn, and developers rule the world. It has to happen with design first. You can't just switch those around. It's not a Abelian, right? I have a plus sign, don't be confused. This equation is not commutative. So I want to talk for a moment a little bit about design thinking and how you go and how you should approach building these applications. This is a fundamental shift, just as important as open sources, right? This is a fundamental shift of how we think about application development. And what's amazing is, you know, as we look at, you know, IBM's been around 100 plus years, right? I haven't been around 100 plus years, but what's amazing is the notion of good design. And by the way, the notion of design doesn't have to be a user interface, please. It could be an API. In fact, good design and API makes me a lot happier than the user interface, maybe because I spend most of my time dealing with APIs, right? But design is extremely important, and how you incorporate design in your development process is extremely important. So what we've done over the past, I'd say 3 or 4 years, is really try to sharpen on this discipline of design thinking in the context of Agile. Okay, so we all know about Agile. We all know about pair programming, for example. And by the way, have you guys ever seen pair programming in open source world? Because right now when we do open source development, it really isn't pair programming, right? I don't know of many projects that do that. Well, when you guys get involved in the Cloud Foundry one, we're going to have pair programming with Google Hangouts in that project as part of the development process. Okay, we've been testing it out before we launched the foundation. It's actually pretty neat. So think about the speed that you can develop, not just hang out in an IRC channel, which is good, but actually be able to see somebody, right, and have that as part of the process. So we're going to incorporate that in. But it's important that you start to institutionalize in your companies, big or small, this notion of design thinking, and that you bring together users, buyers, and coders, right, at very well-defined and formalized steps in your design process, right? We all have kickoffs. We have these notion of playbacks. You can call them different things, but these are essentially where little sprints where you build code, you have little hills, and you come back to your users and you say, hey, how does this look, right? And then you change, right, and you do it again and again and again, right? Now, the difference here is the involvement of the user and the involvement of the end user. They're engaged not just at those playbacks, but they're engaged as you're building those playbacks with smaller levels of granularity. They're engaged in defining the metrics of what it is you're trying to use. And by the way, this notion of design is not just end-user design. It's also the API. So if I'm working with you and you're going to use my interface, you and I should be talking, right? Hey, by the way, I just changed this to be a string type. Is that cool? No, Angel, that's not cool. Well, let's have a discussion, right? So that notion of design thinking is very, very important. Now, let me say a word about Watson in the context of Bluemix. Everybody know what IBM Watson is? Yes? Guys watch the Jeopardy? Yeah? I do. I'm terrible at it. I don't know anything. They never ask questions that I know. I mean, that's a problem. Can we fix that so they can ask questions that I actually know? They have subjects that are just too weird. I have a very narrow, I got to work on my T-shaped skills. Right? I'm very narrow focused. What's amazing about what we've done, right, and you all know about the Turing test, right, where you can, whether or not someone's human, right, if a computer can fool a human. I think we're getting pretty close. It's kind of scary, actually, but we're getting pretty close. And if you see what happened since we've done our little Jeopardy gig, we've managed to really hone the technology, not just reduce its size and kind of sharpen it, but generalize it so that others can start building applications around it, right? I mean, in the medical field, this is just unbelievable, right? In the sense that imagine you walk into a doctor, they look at your symptoms and say, okay, Angel, you've got, I don't know, you've got the flu, you've got something, right? But the Watson tells the doctor, says, yeah, it could be that, but here are 5 other things it could also be. Did you think about it? That's hugely powerful. I'm not knocking on doctors, but maybe they didn't, attend the last seminar on something, right? Or maybe they forgot something, or maybe they're in a hurry, right? It's just an advisor, right? Or in fact, Watson's being used as almost as a human. You would think it's a human, with USAA, the insurance company, right? And when you go there, you actually interact and ask questions to a rep, which is actually Watson, which very quickly helps you get to your answer. So the ability for this to work in very specific domains is very powerful. And then what we've done in the last couple of years is try to generalize this for you all. So I've got 3 challenges for you. Challenge number 1 is go to Bluemix and start using, or try to start using these Watson APIs and build some neat applications. Because there are things that you can use like identifying a language, by doing machine translation, by getting direct responses to questions, understanding relationships and networks and graphs, right? Which I would imagine is quite valuable for any application or any unicorn you're trying to build. Why would you want to go do that yourself, right? I mean, wouldn't it be neat if I had a Titan Graph database as a service In Bluemix, I can just go and build a graph with arcs, Jason, right? Wouldn't that be neat? That'd be awesome. He's working on it. When is that going to be out? Soon? Okay. Right? Wouldn't that be neat? I mean, but think about it, right? There's so many algorithms and there's so many applications, social applications. You're doing social network analysis. That's a graph. Do you really want to create your own graph data store and have it scale? Really? Really? Do you? Do you? Bueller, right? No, you don't, right? You'd use a specialized open source, say, graph database to go do that, right? So that's the power of what you start to get when you start to use these things. We had a hackathon for folks, and the winner of the hackathon, and probably the neatest application was this little plush doll called Fang. And what it would do is it would talk to children, and the children can ask it questions. And it would learn from what the child is asking, right, to then ask them questions that help them learn about related topics, okay? Just using those APIs. That's 100 times better any plush toy I see in the market today that could answer 6 questions, right? Or follow me around or whatever, right? That's just an example of the power of being able to do these things. So, what does it mean for developers to rule the world? So, request number 2 for you all is don't be a nullhead. Notice I said nullhead. That's not a bad word, right? In other words, develop responsibly. When you think about this equation, think about open from a community perspective and think about open from a code perspective, right? The person who invented ALGOL, right? ALGOL, and created the null pointer has regretted it ever since. It was a convenience for him because he was doing compiler design. But those of us who actually coded, or I still code in C++ or C, I mean, I can't tell you how we have screwed up the world, right, with the null pointer, okay, and how we use null as a test, right? It's complete. What is null? It's nothing, right? I don't know why I'm looking over here now, right? So the point is, develop responsibly, right? Don't drink in development, which is kind of strange, but or play loud music, or I don't know. But develop responsibly. Think about what you're doing, right? This person's regretting it, right? Because it was a convenience for him, but it had a negative effect in the world, right? And number 3, just remember that design thinking leads code development, and you can find this double rainbow unicorn. It does exist. You just need to improve your chances of finding it, right? By looking at open technology and using this notion of design thinking. And if you develop responsibly, you will be able to rule the world. That's it. Thank you so much for attending. I appreciate it.